And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance. And they set Kamala Harris up to fail. That was a 3-month campaign, and she was supposed to introduce herself to the American people. No wonder people were Googling, did Joe Biden drop out? And so...
No. You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough? It was too long.
It was long enough.
It was long enough.
If they had a primary...
Sure, it's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone and they didn't like them.
If they had a primary, they wouldn't have picked her. And if they had,
That's
she would have been able to rough out those edges that then she basically has to start from scratch with a campaign team she didn't hire that didn't like her, right? It was his team.
In this episode of Real Time with Bill Maher, Bill hosted a couple of particularly woke guests and ended up completely shutting them down. You know the conversation is going off the rails when even Maher, who often leans left, feels compelled to call out the absurdity of certain progressive narratives. What makes it all the more ironic is that the same people who often accuse right-wingers of promoting conspiracy theories are now circulating similar claims about election fraud. For years, conservatives have been advocating for voting reforms to protect election integrity, only to be dismissed or vilified by the left. Now, many of those same critics are expressing concerns about election interferences, essentially accusing Donald Trump of somehow stealing the election. It's a textbook example of political hypocrisy. Back to the main point. In this clip, Maher doesn't hold back. He dismantles his guests' arguments, which are full of contradictions and exaggerated claims, with sharp wit and brutal clarity. Let's take a closer look at how he picks apart their flawed logic.
Everything the candidates, especially the Democrats, do to get voters annoys them. The constant texting. Did you get the texts like from Tim Walz every 5 minutes and like always begging for money and knocking on doors? And we've got people knocking on doors. People don't want knocking on your door. Who in this day and age wants someone knocking on? Kids don't even like it when you get a phone call. That's like too much of a invasion of their privacy, which they don't care about. Who might emerge as the strongest Democratic opposition leader in the next Trump era? Oh, well, that's a good question. I mean, like Adam Schiff, he won right big.
He won big. I like Wes Moore.
Wes Moore's fantastic. He's in Maryland.
Yep.
But who's going to be the one? Gavin Newsom we have here in this state. He's already like called the legislature to. Trump hasn't done anything yet, but I understand the.
This was the problem. There was a 2014 study that showed that Fortune 500 companies were more likely to pick a female CEO if the company was struggling, basically setting women up for the big job, but to also fail. If they did well, fine. But if they failed, like, look, we have a female CEO while failing. And that's what I feel like they did to Kamala Harris. When Biden refused to step aside and not run again, he was supposed to be that bridge. He backed off on that promise due to arrogance.
Let's break this down. The idea that the Democratic Party was somehow forced to make Kamala Harris their candidate is completely absurd. The party wasn't obligated to choose her, they had options. If the so-called power players in the Democratic establishment are as strategic as some claim, why would they back a candidate they believed was destined to fail? It just doesn't add up. If Harris was seen as a weak choice from the start, there were plenty of other viable candidates. The logic simply doesn't hold. Now let's talk about this strange claim that Fortune 500 companies are more likely to appoint women as CEOs when they're on the brink of collapse. Even if there's truth to that statistic, a more reasonable interpretation is that companies in crisis are willing to take bold risks. After years of poor performance under male leadership, they might see a woman leader as a fresh perspective, a potential turnaround figure, not as a scapegoat. To frame it as a conspiracy to blame women for corporate failure is disconnected from reality. This kind of thinking reflects the worst of the woke narrative, identity over substance. Rather than acknowledging the complexities of leadership and high-stakes decision-making, they default to oversimplified theories that say more about their ideology than the actual facts. It's delusional and reductionist.
I think that is a very high degree of difficulty put on anybody, and I do not think she is the perfect candidate. I tend to agree with Sarah that probably in a fully litigated primary, she probably would not have been the Democratic nominee, but will never know that. But I will tell you that, there's never been anybody who's had the difficulty of that situation, elevated that late in the campaign. Why?
Democrat would have needed to run away from
Bill, I don't know if you know this, but the Vice President of the United States is basically shoved in a broom closet for 3.5 years.
I know.
You couldn't.
She was more popular in there.
Yes, well.
I mean, this idea that the idea in a mass media age that 107 days is not long enough to know somebody.
You are way overestimating the American people in terms of what they.
No.
You have someone like Donald Trump has become a universally known, understood, loved by some, hated by others over the course of being omnipresent for 8 years.
Decades.
Okay.
Barack Obama becomes president of the United States after running for 2 years as president, runs a 50-state primary, is on television, does dozens of Democratic debates, and by the time at the end of that, most people knew who he was. Most people.
Yeah.
You drop somebody into the middle of the top of the ticket,
John,
3 days out, 3 months out. You are going to have to spend a lot of time trying to introduce yourself to the country while also being in a steel cage death match with Donald Trump.
Debate grew more heated as the guests failed to find common ground. As usual, Bill Maher's sharp arguments carried the discussion, and he clearly dominated the exchange. He gave his guests no breathing room, and it made for compelling television. This is definitely a video worth watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful and engaging content like this. Now, let's jump back into the episode.
But I don't know if you ever watched this show, but I had Michael Douglas on this week.
Yeah.
At the top, we were talking about this, and he made a very good point that every other country in the world can do it in months, sometimes weeks. Why can every other country do it in that short a period of time? Are they all that so much brighter than America? I don't think so.
Well,
Mostly parliamentary. I mean, there's like literal reasons, right? We don't have a parliamentary system.
I mean,
we also have a First Amendment.
we
don't make people campaign this whole time. The American people want to give them $20, and so they can afford it. I mean, small dollar donors are arguably the worst thing that's happened to our politics, as it turned out.
It's a small dollar donor didn't make $20 billion. No.
A lot of it.
Some of it, yeah.
And they represent about 2% of our country.
There's a few special PACs in there that saw $100 million
those
plus.
are bad too.
I think you can believe that you could have shorter elections in America, but it's not like we don't know. In Britain, for instance, when you have a short election, it's not like you don't know who the leader of the party is for months and years before that.
But you're either the person who's Googling the day before, did Biden drop out, or you know in a week. You know, did anyone in this audience not know enough about Kamala Harris pretty much after a week to make a decision? Yeah, you just people.
How are
It's
you gonna enforce
ridiculous. We just get sicker of them.
What? So
How are you going to tell people they
say
can't
the
talk
same
about politics?
What?
How with free speech that I know you love?
Yeah.
How are you going to limit people's ability to run for office?
I'm not limiting. We're not making a law.
Bill Maher was absolutely on point in this episode of Real Time. I don't always agree with him, but he really nailed it, here especially with his take on reforming American politics. His suggestions were simple and powerful. Eliminate lobbyists, ban third-party donations, and ensure that politicians only receive their government salaries, no outside income, no backdoor deals. In theory, it sounds like a great fix. Of course, even in that ideal world, corruption would likely find other ways to sneak in. That's just the unfortunate reality of politics. Still, the core idea of removing financial incentives from politics is a step in the right direction. What stood out most in this episode was how Maher completely dismantled the arguments of the two woke guests on his left. I don't even know who they were. Their takes were so out there, it was hard to take them seriously. Maher wasn't having any of it, and he shut them down with precision. Let me know what you thought of this clash on Real Time. Was Maher right to call them out? And do you think there's any real hope for fixing American politics with the system we have? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching.